Hello, it's me Samantha, and today I'm going to show how I do the Afghan stitch. As with everything in crochet, you're going to begin with a chain stitch. So when I begin my chain, I fold my yarn into the shape of a pretzel. I'm sure we all know what a little pretzel looks like. So we're just going to fold that. You got that one little loop, and then you put another little loop behind that. And just fold those yarn over until it looks like a little pretzel. So, I call that my little pretzel. Then I'm going to insert my hook into that loop of the pretzel, and then I pull that through and then just tighten that. And then I have this little tail that's hanging, and then the rest of the yarn that's connected to the skein of yarn that I'm working with, I can pull that and tighten it or loosen it however I want to. And I am left-handed, so everything you see is going to be done left-handed, but if you're right-handed, then just do the same thing, except you're going to be using your right hand instead of your left hand. And so we have this first loop on our hook, and I always say crocheting is about doing what's comfortable for you. And for me, it's comfortable for me to hold my hook this way. And I thread my yarn first over my ring finger on my right hand, and then over my index finger. And that's just how I hold my yarn, and it gives me a good tension, gives me a good hold on my yarn. And I take my thumb and my middle finger and hold on to the base of what I'm working on. So right now I'm just kind of holding on to this tail and the little knot that's at the bottom of this first loop as I crochet. Now when I begin this chain, I'm going to put a loop over that hook and pull that loop through the loop that's already on my hook, and that's your first chain. And then that's your second chain, and then so on and so forth. That's the third chain. And for this demonstration, we're only going to do 6 chains. And so that's 6. And when you look at the front of your chain, I said it looks just like a braid. So when I start my Afghan stitch, I like to stitch, and you're going to stitch into the chain, but I like to turn it over. And when you look at the back of it, you see the back of the chain, and there in the middle, there's this loop. I call it like a little bump that goes down the middle. That's that stitch that I stitch into. Now, with the Afghan stitch, I call it the Afghan stitch. Many people are used to hearing the Tunisian stitch, or you call it the Tunisian stitch. So when you hear me say Afghan stitch, that is the very same thing. I learned it. When I learned it, it was called Afghan stitch. That's just how I learned it, and I'm just used to saying the Afghan stitch, but it's all the same thing. Now this first loop on your hook is your first stitch. So when you're going to stitch into your chain, you're going to skip that first chain. This is the first chain. You're going to skip that, and you're going to stitch into the second chain, right into that bump that I talked about that's in the middle. And you're going to pull a loop through that. So that's 2 stitches on your hook. And then into the next stitch, that's 3, and you're going to stitch into every stitch until you get to the end. That's 3, and that's 4, and this is 5, and the last one is 6. The last one, sometimes that last one is a little tight. And pull that through. So now you have 6 stitches on your hook, and you're going to work those stitches off. First, you're just going to pull a loop through 1 stitch, and then now you have that loop, and then the rest of the stitches on your hook. So now you're going to have to pull 2 loops off at one time to work the rest of them off. That's the third one. That's 4, 5. And for your total of 6, because we started off with those 6 chains. Pull out some more yarn. And that's your first row. And then the second row you're going to stitch As you look at this first row, you'll see these vertical stitches, okay, on every row. The beginning, that first loop is your first stitch. So now you're going to stitch into that second vertical stitch, and that's 2, then 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then you're going to work these stitches off just like you did that first row. First work off 1 loop, then 2, until you get to the end. Oops. So I'm going to put that back on my hook. And put that 2. That makes 4, 5, and 6. And that's your second row. And this is your third row. Total of 6 stitches on my hook. And work them off the very same way. 3, 4, 5, and 6. And that's 3 rows. And now we're going to do 1 more row for this demonstration. We'll do 4 rows. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Don't you hate it when the yarn comes out of the center of the skein like that? You got to kind of straighten that out a little bit. Now, as you can see, it does curl, and that's something many of us hate. I know I hate it. A lot of people ask, how do you stop the curling? Some people say when they finish the project, they'll put a border around whatever it is they're making, and that makes it lay flat. Some people say that the larger the hook you use, the less it curls. But no matter what I do, it still curls. But what I like to do is I use a steam iron, and I press it with that steam iron using lots of steam. You know, those irons that have that button that you press to get that extra burst of steam. So I just press it and I use lots of steam, and it makes it lay flat, and it makes the yarn very soft. Now these are 2 swatches that I did earlier, and I pressed them when I was done, and this is after I steam it, and it just lays nice and flat, and it makes the yarn, I don't care what brand of yarn you're using, how soft it is. When you press it with that steam iron, it makes it even softer. So I like that, so that's what I do. Now when you look at these rows, you see we did 4 rows. Now when you look at the first 3 rows and you look at this 4th row, you can see a difference. You see those 3 rows, they're nice and neat, and the spaces are, you don't see any spaces in between. But when you look on this 4th row, you see that they have those spaces in between. That 4th row looks different. But now if we were to do a 5th row, then that would fill in just like these other ones did. But since this is our last row, we're not going to do another row, but we're going to slip stitch in each stitch all the way across, and that'll fill that out. So we're going to insert the hook in that stitch just like we would if we were doing another row, and we'd pull that loop through, but we would also pull that loop through the stitch that's on my hook, and see how that fills that out. And then you're just going to do that all the way across in each stitch, and that's how you finish off your last row. And into that last stitch, and then you're just going to cut that and fasten it off. Now my tails that I have left over, I turn it to the back, and I just take my hook and I just pull those little tails through, and I just weave it in. Just weave it into the back of the Afghan or a scarf or whatever I'm making. I've already done it to this one I did earlier. If you look at that row, you might be able to tell a little bit. That's that. I do it for about 6, 7, 8 stitches. At least about 6 stitches. And that's just how I get rid of these tails that are hanging from the end. And those 6 chains. Now, however wide, whatever you're making, however wide that project is, however many, if you're looking at the graph of the pattern, if it's 33 stitches wide, you're going to chain those 33 stitches, just like this scarf I'm working on. This scarf is 33 stitches wide, so when I began it, I started off with a 33 stitch chain, and then I did each row, you know, picking up my colors. I did, like for this project, I did 10 rows of green, and then I did 5 rows of white, then 5 of green, and then I started following the pattern to make this New York Jets emblem, and just follow the pattern, pick up the right colors at the right time, and that just makes your design or your picture. And this right here, and then I did several more rows of the scarf, and then this right here I'm beginning to spell out jets. So this is the beginning of my J. So I'm just following a pattern and just doing those stitches just like I did in that little demonstration, but instead of just 6 stitches across, I'm using 32 stitches. And also, I'm also working on this New York Giants blanket. Now this is much bigger, of course. This is 310 stitches wide. And of course, a lot of people ask, well, what kind of hook do I use for that? How am I going to fit all of that on this little short 9-inch Afghan hook? Believe me, you can't. I have this 9-inch Afghan hook, and I also have one that's a little bit longer. This is about 14 inches. So this will help accommodate larger projects. I think with about this one, you can fit about 100 stitches on comfortably. But I wouldn't push it any further than that. Now they also have these hooks that have the hook on one end, and then there's this cable attached to it, and then this stopper at the end. This allows you to place a whole lot more stitches on because of this flexible end. That makes it possible to add a whole lot of stitches. And then of course the stopper, this keeps the stitches on, and it won't fall off. Let you put a whole lot of stitches on at one time. But the one I like the best, because I mostly make large projects. I make a lot of Afghans, and I love the circular crochet hook. This is my personal preference, and it's just it's made of two crochet hooks, 2 long crochet hooks, as you can see, and they're attached in the middle by this cable in the middle. And the cable in the middle is what makes it possible to fit hundreds of stitches on at one time. This Afghan that I showed you right here, that's exactly the hook that I'm using for this project. Some people get confused when they see the 2 crochet hooks. They think that you're crocheting with both hooks. You're only crocheting with one end. And then you have the cable in the middle is what makes it possible to put all these stitches on. Now this is 310 stitches, and as you can see, I can push that down even further and still be able to fit on, I know, hundreds more if I needed to, but it just depends on how big a project you're working on. And then this hook at the opposite end, this crochet hook, you're not really crocheting with it. You're just putting stitches on that hook, and as you slide your stitches down further, you have the hook on the end, and that hook is just what keeps your stitches on, and it just keeps them from falling off. So you're not crocheting with both of the crochet hooks. You're only crocheting with one end, and the other end is just to keep the stitches on. So just like I did those 6 stitches in the demonstration, in this blanket I did 310 stitches, and that's the end. You know, that's my 310th stitch. And as you can see, I've worked off a few stitches, and now I'm just using this end of the hook to work the rest. You know, this is what I'm crocheting with. I'm working off these stitches, and of course, you know, I'm picking up my next color I come to. I work that off, I also have another video where I show how I change colors. And then that's just like the little example I showed with the 6 stitches, but instead of 6 stitches, it's 310 stitches. So it just depends on your pattern, the project you're working on. You can make something that's 10 stitches wide. You can make something that's 400 stitches wide. Just possibilities are endless. I love the Afghan Stitch, and if you've never tried it, I hope you come to love it as much as I do. Thank you for watching.